Hey class, so for this video we are going to be taking our low resolution model and making a high resolution model and then baking the details of the high onto the low. Select your low resolution model, duplicate it, and then rename it with _high in the outliner. That's really important. And then we're going to remove it from the original layer that it was on and create a new layer from selected. So we're just going to put this new model onto a new layer and rename it and call it like high res. Cool. And now we can turn off the visibility of our low res model so we know we're only working on the high res model right now. So you can see if I click on the low one, it's not active, but if I click on the high one, it is. Cool. And I'm just going to go back to regular perspective view so I don't need to do any UVs at the moment. So I'm going to work in my top view and I'm just going to add a few minor details. You can go crazy with adding lots and lots of details yourself, but for me in this tutorial, I'm just going to keep it really simple. So I created a cube and I went to mesh and smooth. That got lost because my computer crashed. But just adding a few details here and there. So right now on this high resolution model, it's okay if you have a high poly count. All of the details that we're adding from this high resolution will be hopefully baked into the low resolution version. So I'm just showing you that. So I'm just going to kind of pretend like this is some sort of bolt, the top of a bolt, or maybe a sensor or something. And I'm going to put one on one side and then move, scale, and rotate so it looks like it's coming out of the model. And then duplicate that and put it on the other side. And you can always use your channel box layer editor as a guide. So if it's rotated in one direction on one side, if you change it to the positive direction on the other side, it's all good. Okay, so now I'm also going to turn on symmetry. So remember that's that object X in the top middle of my screen. And I'm going to go to mesh and smooth my entire model. So this is adding divisions all over my model and is kind of baking in the artificial smoothness and giving us more to work with. Then I'm going to just click, shift, double click. So click, shift, double click both of these rings around the edges of the model, and I'm doing an extrusion, so that's Command E. And I'm doing like a very tiny extrusion. So first extrusion is tiny. Do the exact same thing again, Command E, or go to Edit Mesh and Extrude. And this time I'm going to do a larger extrusion. So the first extrusion kind of added a holding edge. The second extrusion added the geometry. I'm also going to add a kind of a ring around the edge here for some detail. Now I will note that this does create some problems later with the baking, but I can try and fix that on the low res model later. So you can see that it's grabbed some extra faces here. So I'm just going to hold down Control, click, and drag, and that will deselect any extra faces that were added. So again, I'm doing an extrusion. I'm just going to extrude up a tiny, tiny bit, like 0.1. And then I could always extrude again. But what that's going to do is add kind of a definition around the edges. Next up, I'm just going to select a few faces on the inside of this kind of laser area just to extrude those in. So just speeding this up a tiny, tiny bit. My first extrusion is going to be an extrude offset, and then I'll extrude it inwards using the blue arrow a couple times. And remember, I'm doing this extrusion multiple times, so Command E, because that will enable me to have holding edges. So you'll also notice that my symmetry is not working anymore. At some point it must have stopped working, so that's kind of the downfall of symmetry. Once you turn it off, sometimes it just doesn't really start working again. But that's okay. It's useful for as long as it is useful. All right, so doing a little bit of local Z translate, just adding a little definition, and then I can always do one more extrusion to add that. Now I have a pretty good, fairly simple high-res model, and I have a fairly simple low-res model. So I'm just going to deselect everything and just take a look at what this high-res model looks like. So it just has a little more definition on the outside of the top. It has the extrusions on the wings, and it also has these additional pieces. For these pieces, I am going to just double check and UV them. I'm adding them to my high-res layer. And I'm just going to make sure, to be honest, I don't think it's necessary, but make sure that they are not overlapping with anything in the UV editor. So let's turn off my symmetry. I'm going to grab these little cubes, middle mouse button, click and drag them into the high model so that they're all in the same group. I can also take this time to rename and combine everything. So let's just click combine for my high res group. And you'll see that it makes a new geo, so that's Spaceship High P cube, outside of my group. So let's try this one more time. All right. To move it back into the group, first I'm going to delete history and freeze transformations, and then middle mouse button, click and drag it back into that group. Now the other two little groups that are still here, okay, I've got to rename this underscore high. The other two groups that are still here are just empty groups that I can just click on and delete. So I'm going to do this exact same process with the low res version. So I've got my P cube. That one I can just rename Spaceship underscore low. I could add underscore geo to it and then just delete that extra group. So we have a super clean little model here with just two meshes. There we go. Then I added geo to it. And geo is generally the signifier that it's geometry. All right, so now if I select my high-res model, you can see that these two little cube pieces turned out to be giant pieces on my UV editor. So I'm just going to move them and scale and rotate them down and put them in a place where they won't overlap with anything, and they're still in the same UDIM, the same space. It doesn't really matter for this high res, but it's kind of good practice to make sure that they're okay. And I'm going to always fix non-manifold geometry if I need to, but I think it's fine. All right, now move on to the next video where we will export as OBJs and send our files to Substance Painter for baking.